Adolf Hitler has taken power in Germany. He has got there by promising to be a man of peace. He has barely even mentioned the Jews. This is the story of how Hitler and the Nazis bend an entire people to his will.
A grave is locked behind metal, a surname too toxic to show, a woman erased from history. Until now, for decades, the final resting place of Adolf Hitler's only full sibling remained hidden, her identity literally padlocked from public view. But in 2025, a new investigation shattered the silence, and what it uncovered is more chilling than anyone imagined. Was she just a forgotten sister, or was she hiding something far more disturbing? From secret relationships and disturbing family ties to suppressed Nazi connections and modern-day fears, here's the full story behind the woman who shared Hitler's blood and might have shared far more. The grave no one was meant to see, in the peaceful Bavarian town of Berchtesgaden, nestled among the Alps, lies a cemetery most tourists would walk past without a second glance. But tucked away in the Berchtesgaden Friedhof, or mountain cemetery, there's one grave that has sparked silent unease for decades. At first glance, it appears unremarkable, a modest stone marker shared by a local couple. But on closer inspection, you'll notice something strange. A small, rusting padlock on the side of the nameplate. What lies beneath is the key to a hidden chapter in history, one many believed was buried for good. The padlocked plaque is not just a curiosity, it's a deliberate attempt to obscure identity. Behind the lock, mounted on a hinge, is a concealed name, Paula Hitler, the only full sibling of Adolf Hitler to survive into adulthood. In 2005, the original marker was quietly removed, only to be returned a year later with this bizarre contraption designed to shield her identity from public view. The message was clear. This grave was not meant to be seen, not meant to be remembered. For decades, very few knew the full story behind Paula's grave. Local records, confused by her use of multiple surnames, added to the mystery. Some believed it would be erased completely. Others whispered that neo-Nazis had defaced or even stolen the original marker. But in 2025, a team of historians and forensic researchers finally unlocked the truth. Literally. Under the umbrella investigation of unmarked and altered graves related to the Nazi era, Paula's grave was examined. The findings would confirm years of speculation and reveal chilling new details concerning the woman whose bloodline was tied directly to one of history's greatest monsters. Photographs taken in the 1950s helped confirm the grave's authenticity. Elderly residents recalled a soft-spoken woman living alone nearby who went by the name Paula Wolf. It was, of course, an alias. The same alias Hitler himself used while traveling incognito in the early years of the Nazis. These hints, combined with cemetery maps, rental histories, and even water bills, confirmed what nobody wanted to acknowledge. The Führer's sister had lived and died a stone's throw away from his obliterated mountain home. More frightening is what visitors to the grave sometimes report. A glass container with an old black and white photograph inside sits at the foot of the stone, nestled among weeds and broken candle holders. It has an image of a modestly dressed young woman who stares blankly beyond the camera. Her eyes are dark, sunken, her face hardened by war, grief, and perhaps something more. Who regularly replaces the candle next to it is unknown, with some believing it to be an elderly sympathizer, while others think it may be descendants of Hitler's half-siblings who would like her grave to be remembered but kept discreet. What a weird endeavor to hide but not destroy. Paula Hitler's grave raises some very hard questions. Why not remove the marker altogether? Why padlock it? Why all the bother over trying to erase her identity while keeping the site intact? It is as if her memory had to be both counted and counted against, remembered quietly, but hidden from public reckoning. Cemeteries usually offer peace, closure, but certainly not here. This grave breathes a silent warning about what happens when we sanitize history and bury uncomfortable truths under layers of denial. But this grave is just the beginning, because Paula's life was far darker than history has claimed. The family. Nobody wanted to talk about, beneath the monstrous reputation of Adolf Hitler, lies a family history so tangled and disturbing. It's no wonder few dare to explore it. What most don't realize is that the seeds of control, secrecy, and dysfunction that defined Hitler's rule were first planted at home, long before war and genocide. And standing quietly in that chaotic household was his forgotten sister, Paula Hitler, the only full sibling to survive alongside him. Paula wasn't just the sister of a dictator, she was born into a web of incest, grief, and cruelty. Her father, Alois Hitler, was already infamous within the family for his violence. He'd married 3 times, fathered children both inside and outside of wedlock, and maintained an authoritarian grip on his household. When Paula was born in 1896, her father was in his late 50s, already broken by age, bitterness, and alcohol. And her mother, Clara Pölzl, she was Alois's first cousin, once removed. Their marriage was illegal by church law without a special waiver, one which Alois obtained, seemingly without shame. Clara called her husband uncle until the very end of her life, and their relationship, a weird blend of familial and power dynamics, would loom uncomfortably over the family. In Paula's time, 4 full siblings had already died, 3 from diphtheria, 1 from complications in early infancy. Of those born, only Adolf in 1889 and Paula were to survive childhood. So tragedy, in a way, was something that became a kind of an assistant to Paula, a shadow that she could never shake off. It was a terrible household, with many things going on inside the walls. Alois used to take some punishment, and so did his wife, his children, and even the pets. While barking and yelling at everyone and demanding unqualified submission, Alois was devoid of any love, and treated discipline like one qualified for military training, an entirely different mode of life. Poor Paula, 7 years younger than Adolf, bore the brunt of it more often than not, and on occasion, he would pass the buck to her. From later accounts, it was said that Adolf took on the role of patriarch after Alois passed on in 1903, since he physically abused Paula too. The violence didn't end with their father's death, but simply changed hands. When Paula was barely 11, she found her mother, Clara, dead of cancer. So alone, orphaned, and overshadowed by a brother, already obsessed with becoming more than he was, Paula's life was set adrift. An infinitesimal pension from the Austrian government was scraped together and a stipend in Vienna, while endeavoring to become an artist in failure, his brother. Very little contact took place during these years. Adolf was engaged with rejection, poverty, and the deeper curtain of his distorted ideology. On the other hand, Paula was surviving, quietly and invisibly, in the city around him. In the meantime, the half-siblings of Hitler from earlier marriages lived scandalous lives. Between the years 1919 and 1945, his half-sister, Angela Hitler, was a recurring figure in his life, serving as housekeeper at Hitler's mountain home, the Berghof. In the middle of rumors surrounding allegations of Geli Raubals being Hitler's romantic obsession, possibly abusive, which led her to take her own life in 1931 in Hitler's Munich apartment. Just that one scandal almost damaged Hitler's public image for life. Yet, through it all, Paula kept remaining on the fringe, never too close, never completely gone. With that, Paula kept herself out of the limelight, but not out of the ideology. Kicking against Hitler's views on personal matters, Angela argued and picked fights, while Paula just absorbed it all from the sidelines. She never joined the Nazi Party, but was openly sympathetic to her brother. And though she may have tried to have her own modest life under other names, her loyalties were never truly in doubt. Most sinisterly, Paula was not the estranged sister many would assume she was. She certainly did not oppose Adolf's rise. She did not run. She stayed there within reach, both geographically and mentally, and in many ways, her silence was its own kind of complicity. But while most of the family faded into obscurity, Paula stayed close to the one man the world would never forget, a sister hidden in plain sight. For most of her life, Paula Hitler managed something extraordinary. She lived in the center of one of history's darkest storms, yet remained virtually invisible. While her brother's name became synonymous with death and destruction, Paula drifted through the fringes of history, unnoticed and unbothered by the spotlight. But her invisibility was no accident. It was crafted, maintained, and enforced, both by her brother and by Paula herself. She began by changing her name. After the collapse of her family and the rise of Adolf's political ambitions, Paula quietly dropped the Hitler surname. She adopted Hedler, a variation linked loosely to her father's old surname prior to it being changed to Hitler. Later, she would use Wolf, the same alias Adolf himself had used when operating in secrecy during the early years of the Nazi Party. This name game wasn't about reinvention, it was about survival. But it also signaled something more chilling. Paula was actively distancing herself from the shame of Hitler's name while still protecting its power. Paula slaved behind many modest jobs in Vienna in the years just before the outbreak of World War II. One of the most ironic was as a housekeeper in a dormitory for Jewish university students. This was around the time Adolf was evolving his bizarre brand of anti-Semitic ideology, which was going to lay down the pattern for his entire regime. Whether or not Paula already knew something about such beliefs of his at this time is unknown, but the contrast in these lives is so eerie. She worked among the very people her brother would later target, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Adolf was back in Paula's life as of 1921, visiting her at the dormitory while expanding his political presence in Munich. He was boastful about it even then, and gave Paula a wide berth. She was never a participant in the inner circle. She never went to meetings, and she was never seen at any party functions. On the other hand, she was not forgotten. In 1930, after her employers at the Austrian State Insurance Company learned about her unmistakable identity, she was fired almost immediately. This was followed within weeks by Adolf, who at that time had grown immensely powerful, and he was the leader of the second-largest political party in Germany, taking considerations for his sister. For her maintenance, he decreed a pension of 250 Austrian shillings a month so that she would not suffer from any lack. All that, as he made sure anyhow that she was taken care of without too much exposure. And there it remained for much of the 1930s. Unlike her half-sister Angela, who lived in Hitler's household and frequently interacted with the top Nazis, Paula had limited contact. She visited her brother about once a year, often privately. According to Paula herself, she met Eva Braun only once, and she never became close to anyone from Hitler's inner circle. But the distance does not mean that she was distant herself. In fact, maybe it was deliberate strategy. Paula never spoke against her brother. She never questioned his policies, and she never seemed surprised by life went on modestly for her, even when the rest of the world changed around her. She preferred to stay in Vienna and escape all the noise that was being made around her. Yet, the whispers became louder. Who was this woman, so much related to the blood of Hitler, but shared no part of his war? Was it possible she really didn't know the camps, the slayings, the madness? Or perhaps she crafted a different role altogether, of quiet support but plausible deniability. One thing she was sure of, she knew the perils of being visible to the eyes of the world. Every decision she made, changing name, staying distant, limiting public appearances, has been devised to keep herself safe and to maintain her connections with Adolf. She did not reject them. She just hid them. She was just another passive footnote in history, a quiet relative of a dictator. But 1942 changed everything. A relationship, a scandal, and a bloody intervention on the part of her brother would pull her out of the shadows and into the darkest part of the Nazi machine. Then came the relationship that would reveal just how close Paula had come to Nazi horror. Her lover's role in the Nazi machine. Until the early 1940s, Paula Hitler had maintained a delicate balance, living quietly, away from political power, surviving on financial support from her infamous brother, and avoiding direct scrutiny. But that balance was shattered when she fell in love with a man whose name would soon become associated with one of the most heinous crimes of the Nazi era. His name was Dr. Erwin Jacelius, and his legacy was soaked in blood. Dr. Jacelius wasn't just a physician. He was a key Vergiffer in the T4 euthanasia program, a covert Nazi operation designed to systematically slay people with physical and mental disabilities. Branded as life unworthy of life, thousands of adults and children were taken from hospitals and institutions and slain by gas, starvation, or lethal injection. Jacelius personally oversaw thousands of these slayings. His clinical detachment and loyalty to the Reich made him valuable. His willingness to slay made him indispensable. And Paula, Hitler's only full sister, was engaged to him. Not a transient affair, nor an unsubstantial rumor. These two had engaged themselves officially in Vienna, where Paula was working as a secretary in a German military hospital. Among many in the medical and military circles of Vienna, their relationship was pretty well known. But one was Adolf Hitler himself, who reacted with immediate fury upon hearing the news. In 1942, discovering the liaison between Paula and Jacelius, Hitler intervened personally, not as a protective brother, but as a dictator obsessed with loyalty, optics, and control. Through the press, he declared the engagement to be a liability and acted swiftly. Jacelius was forcibly transferred, shipped to the Eastern Front while pretending to be a medical officer in the Wehrmacht. It wasn't even a promotion, but rather a punishment. The message was clear from Hitler. You don't get close to my sister without my permission, and you don't bring shame to my name by associating it with a program so sensitive, so secretive, and so damning. Sooner or later, one would wonder, what made Hitler so aggressive with intervention? Was it simply the contempt he felt toward Jacelius for becoming involved in the T4 program? Ironic, since the action had been initiated by him? Or did it have anything to do with the fact that Paula might have learned something too much? The letters exchanged between Paula and Jacelius were never published. However, witnesses claimed that the two had a close relationship, which included common views on aspects. If Paula knew about the details of Jacelius's employment and approved this could be a reason explaining why Hitler saw the need to cut off this connection before it attracted the wrong kind of inquiry. Of course, Jacelius was doomed. He was captured by Soviet troops near the war's end, branded a major war criminal, and imprisoned in Moscow's infamous Lubyanka. He received a 25-year sentence for hard labor in 1948. He never emerged from those confines. He died of cancer in Soviet custody in 1952 at the age of 46. Paula had no other relationships after that. Paula cut off all public relations with Jacelius following his arrest and transfer, but her silence spoke volumes. She never rejected his crimes. She has never denounced his actions publicly. In fact, she never discussed him again. This chilling silence became her legacy. She was thrown into obscurity, carrying with her memories of a man responsible for the deaths of innocent people. But as the Third Reich crumbled, Paula's escape was orchestrated by the highest levels of Nazi command. Evacuation and interrogation. As World War II neared its catastrophic end, Nazi Germany crumbled from all directions. Cities were reduced to ashes, leaders fled or took their own lives, and the Nazi regime unraveled in a matter of weeks. Yet even amid the chaos, one order was carried out with quiet precision. Adolf Hitler's sister had to be saved. It was April 1945. Soviet troops were storming through Eastern Europe, closing in on Vienna. Paula Hitler, now 49 years old and living under the name Paula Wolf, was still in the Austrian capital. For most citizens, escape was no longer possible. Trains were cut off. Roads were filled with refugees. But Paula wasn't just anyone. She was the last living full sibling of the Führer, and that made her a valuable secret. Following direct orders from Hitler himself, Paula's evacuation was organized by Martin Bormann, one of the most powerful men in the Nazi hierarchy. An SS secret communication was sent out, and on April 14, 1945, just 2 weeks before Hitler took his own life in his Berlin bunker, Paula was picked up by 2 SS officers and escorted out of Vienna to Berchtesgaden under strict security to the mountain stronghold that had once served as Hitler's private retreat. Being hidden away in a quiet residence, Paula awaited the wrath of a ruined Berghof, smashed to smithereens with soon-to-be rubble, Hitler's Alpine home. She was not alone. Her half-sister, Angela, too, had been hidden away after secret relocation from Dresden following the firebombings of February 1945. The Red Army threatened every city they had once called home. But in Berchtesgaden, the sisters waited amid much travesty, with loyalties tied towards her and SS security, yet completely oblivious to the fact that the Reich had only days left to live. Arriving in the early days of May, American troops soon took control over Berchtesgaden, only to realize the very day they came to the town exactly how big an event they had stumbled upon. Hitler's compound, with the staff having scattered, was now abandoned, save for two women with knowledge, connections, and blood ties to the man whose actions had plunged the world into chaos. On May 26, 1945, Paula was arrested by the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps, CIC. She underwent extensive questioning before being held in prison for more than a month. Her file contains a puzzling picture. She denied being involved in Nazi politics, claimed she never joined the party, and insisted she knew little of her brother's plans or crimes. Yet, investigators remarked how Paula would passionately defend Hitler. She called him a good man and a misunderstood patriot. She was a passionate nationalist, and some interrogators were sure that she had been closer ideologically to Adolf than she cared to admit. But here's the kicker. In spite of all the warnings, Paula was let loose on the 12th of July, 1945. Null charges filed. Null follow-up surveillance noted. Officially, she had committed no crimes. She had just been the sibling of Adolf Hitler. Half-sister Angela fared worse. The husband took his own life after World War II, and her health soon deteriorated. In 1949, only 4 years down the line from the fall of the Third Reich, she passed on. Paula, on the other hand, moved back to the quiet life. A life that would appear anything but glamorous, yet was shocking in its lack of punishment. She returned briefly to Vienna to work at an arts and crafts store. But soon she crossed over the borders, this time for good, to Berchtesgaden, where her brother's shade loomed. Alone, in a two-room apartment, under the name of Paula Wolf, she inhabited a world where she remained mostly quiet about her past and mostly in private circles. And those few who really knew her in the later years talked of her as still jarringly loyal to the man who had brought the world to its knees. And even in death, her brother's shadow refused to let her go. Forgotten, yet not gone. After the war, as the world tried to rebuild itself from the ashes of Hitler's devastation, Paula Hitler quietly disappeared into obscurity. She wasn't imprisoned, she wasn't exiled, and she certainly wasn't punished. She simply faded into the background of post-war Germany, into a quiet life under a false name, and into a silence that felt deliberate. But Paula didn't vanish completely. Her shadow remained, and the remnants of her life paint a disturbing portrait of devotion, denial, and quiet preservation of a legacy the world wanted erased. Following her release from American custody in July 1945, Paula returned briefly to Vienna. The city she had once called home was now unrecognizable. It had been bombed, occupied, and overrun by post-war chaos. The arts and crafts shop she worked at barely paid her enough to survive, and the stigma of her last name, though hidden behind Paula Wolf, was never far behind. Eventually, she retreated to the one place where her past was both unavoidable and protected, Berchtesgaden. She settled into a quiet two-room apartment in the Alpine city where Hitler had built his mountainside retreat in 1952. Under the same name she had gone in during the years of the Nazis, she quietly adapted to the rhythm of a post-war life. No husband, no children, no visitors save those few former associates of the regime who still remembered her and supported her. Paula slept in the old-fashioned way. She survived on welfare, but also lived from the coffers of former SS officers and members of Hitler's inner retinue. These weren't anonymous donors. Some were well-known figures of the Nazi elite who believed in preserving what was left of the old guard. Paula, while never again politically active, was a symbol to them, a living piece of the bloodline they still revered. The funds to which Paula was entitled under Hitler's will never came. In his last will and testament, Hitler had decreed that Paula and Angela would receive a monthly pension of 1,000 Reichsmarks. However, the Allied forces froze all his accounts in Switzerland, while the other assets were seized. Paula was named in the will but never received even a single mark. She had to rely instead on hush-hush handouts and dissipating support. Among rare public appearances, Paula filed a lawsuit in an Austrian court in the early 1950s for the recovery of the money Hitler had willed to her. The claim was turned down, but along with the claim, a measure of media interest was stirred, and questions about her role, her beliefs, and her motivations were once again raised. She instantly disappeared from the spotlight once again. Yet those who knew Paula in later life would report her unshakable in her views. She openly praised her brother, asserted that he had been misinterpreted, and never denounced him for his crimes. To her death, she brimmed over with a family loyalty and denial-infused version of history. Ignorance, brainwashing, or something else? British filmmaker Peter Morley went to Germany in 1959 to interview Paula for a documentary. She consented to the interview, but made one condition. She would speak about Adolf only as her brother, not the dictator. The resulting footage was chilling, and she made him out to be kind, tortured, and very sensitive. Calmly, she spoke. Her face, aged but still proud, knew not the expression of shame. Paula Hitler died of stomach cancer on June 1, 1960, at the age of 64, and was buried in Berchtesgaden Friedhof under her birth name, Paula Hitler. For some time, her grave was treated simply, if not respectfully. But with the passing of decades and a new family receiving the plot, this marker was removed in 2005, replaced by a shared stone that concealed her identity instead. In 2006, her name was made the quieter subject of yet another controversy, hidden beneath a hinged plaque, locked and camouflaged, almost as if history were once more conspiring to bury her. And yet, the real shock wouldn't come until decades after her death, when her grave became the center of a silent conspiracy. What they finally revealed, for over 6 decades, Paula Hitler's grave remained a quiet footnote to one of the darkest legacies in human history. Her life, scrubbed of direct involvement in Nazi crimes, was categorized as irrelevant, marked by passivity, obscurity, and silence. But in 2025, a new investigation changed everything. What had once been considered a hidden grave became the center of a revelation that shook historians, stunned forensic experts, and reignited fears that the Nazi story was far from over. It began innocently enough: a municipal review of burial records and plot ownership in Berchtesgaden Friedhof. German law requires periodic re-examinations of grave rights, especially for plots more than 50 years old. As the town prepared to open unused space, local officials petitioned for permission to document the locked marker under which Hitler had been buried. What they uncovered, buried not in metaphor, but in actual soil, was more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. They lay underneath the Paula Cosset, the letters being deliberately sealed in a lead-lined box. The documents themselves had somehow survived undisturbed for decades. They were not the typical personal letters or faded photographs. The investigation stumbled upon unpublished letters dated and signed around 1944-43 to Martin Bormann, Heinrich Himmler, and some unnamed SS officers. The letters are reported to have been purposely hidden, tucked inside a cloth pouch lined with wax and oil paper. Their content violently challenged the long-settled view that Paula Hitler lived in a fool's paradise concerning her brother's crimes. One letter, dated October 1944, contained the passage, "I do not regret the choices made for the homeland. We suffer now so that better people will rise after us." Another, more cryptic letter, addressed to MB, almost certainly Martin Bormann, stated, "The Vienna file must never be opened. The consequences would fracture what remains of our memory." Forensic analysis confirmed that paper stock, ink composition, and handwriting were consistent with the known signatures of Paula. These are not forgeries but genuine, and they reveal unanticipated aspects of Hitler's contribution to the ideological framing of the Nazi regime. Her loyalty was not merely to her brother, but often translated into shared beliefs. Her expression of the necessity for purification and allusions to her being entrusted with final copies of writings she claims were burned in Berlin before the fall would appear to support this notion. Even more chilling was the short, unsigned note, clearly in her hand, found wrapped tightly in oilcloth. The truth will remain hidden. The fire must never go out. It was dated late April 1945, about the same time when she was being transported by SS officers to safety in Berchtesgaden. The ramifications are enormous. These letters imply that Paula was not simply a passive relative who had supported her life on a pension. Perhaps she was a keeper of secrets, safeguarding information and materials meant to outlive the regime. Although no concrete evidence indicates that she actively participated in any crimes, the implications speak of potential ideological compatibility, perhaps a possibility of retaining documents, and likely a probability of carrying out correspondence with high-ranking leaders of Nazism, something previously thought inconceivable. What do you think Paula Hitler truly believed? Was she just a forgotten relative or a willing participant in a legacy of horror? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold histories, and check out our next video for more buried secrets from World War II.